Hey, what's up, guys? In tonight's lecture, as a part of series How to Treat Anti-Sicilians with the Black Pieces, I want to do what you like or what you hate the most, close Sicilians with the Black Pieces. When I was younger, I always hated to play against these positions because they were like out of theory and they were like very specific because they're kind of positional and not so easy to bring up some tactics and come up with some craziness in those type of positions. Anyways, in comparison to previous lectures and previous videos, tonight I'd like to give you an idea how to play these positions throughout the most important model games by black players. We're going to analyze game of Kasparov, Carlsen, and one more game. So let's go. When they go e4, c5, they go knight c3, and that's a classic way of playing the close Sicilians with a white or with the black pieces. So strictly in tonight's lecture, we're just going to talk about knight c3, knight c6, because in my opinion, that's the most logical and strongest answer by black. And when they go g3, that's a typical close Sicilian. And our idea is not going to cover f4, which is a Grand Prix attack and which was the subject of the previous lecture. Check out a video about how to play GPA with the black pieces. The idea is not also to do what I covered in my course, Butcher the Sicilian, Tiviakov's or Azeres system with the bishop e5. No, once again, check the video GPA and playing with black. So here, my job will be to go with the knight c3 and to explain you how to play these positions after knight c6 and g3. Although, you all have to know that there are like two more ways of transposing into similar or absolutely the same type of position in close Sicilians when they go for the second move d3 or when they go for the second move g3. I know that most of you would say, can we still go with things like d5 or trying to punish them for playing, let's just say, passive out of the opening, but you won't be able to do it. The complete point of this video and a lecture itself is to give you a quite universal way of playing against all these three systems. So whether they play knight c3, whether they play d3, whether they play g3, you'll always go with the same approach. You'll play knight c6, you'll play g6, play bishop g7, and here those who go into these positions from this order of moves, you know that they will go with f4. When they play f4, you just go with d6. The point of d6, when they go knight f3, knight f6, castles, castles, is should they go with the knight c3, c3, or h3? Knight c3 is a transposition into one of the main lines of the close Sicilians, and we're just going to discuss these positions a little bit later. Apart from that, for example, in the past, I've experienced a very annoying c3 by white a couple of times, and I even had some troubles in the beginning. Why? The point of these guys who go with this is that they want to play d4, and you all know when you have the bishop on g7 that if they ever go with d4, you'll have some problems with the bishop on g7. So when they go with c3, you just go rook b8. It's one of the most characteristic and typical ways of trading close Sicilian type of games with the pawn storm b5 and b4. It's good because with a rook on b8, you just support b4 break. You just support opening off this diagonal h8, a1, and you just want to weaken the c3 pawn eventually. So when they go a4, you go a6, and they go h3. What happens with h3? There are like 2 points of h3. First of all, and the most important one, they want to go g4, queen e1, and queen h4, which is very similar to the plan of the Grand Prix attack by white. Apart from that, h3 also prevents bishop g4, and if they ever want to go with bishop e3, it also prevents knight g4, taking the bishop away from e3 by knight g4. Of course, it doesn't stop us and prevent our main idea b5, a takes, and they just go g4. So you go with b4. I already played a couple of games in my city. There is a FIDE master who absolutely always go with the same approach with white pieces. Sometimes he first plays knight bd2, sometimes queen e1, sometimes queen e2, sometimes bishop e3, but he always goes with this system with the white pieces. Thanks to that guy, and thanks to, like my constant analysis in these positions, I actually realized some points and secrets, and now I absolutely know how should I treat this. With a rook on b8, with the pawn already being pushed on b4, our bishop on g7 is about to get a very important role in the game. So they just have to go with bishop e3, you take on c3, takes, and you bring your knight back to d7. Knight on d7 doesn't only prevent and move from some e5 threats by white, but also opens up the bishop and creates pressure on c3. That practically means that it won't be able to play any knight bd2 as long as the c3 pawn is hanging. So when they go d4, you just take and they take. This is the point. They've just built up a strong center, and everything really, really looks good for them. So here, it's black's turn, and it's black to move. Black goes with knight b4. What a fantastic move that usually happens in these games. I don't want to explain you that they shouldn't take by bishop. You just take the bishop and you're better. That they can take by this bishop. You can just play bishop b7 and you should be fine. Or do some knight a5 followed by knight c4. All things considered, they gotta take with c pawn to create a pawns being stretched from h3 to d4, and pretty good pawn structure, especially against the bishop on g7. And everything would be good unless we really had this move knight b4. And knight b4 brings us knight f6, bishop a6, queen c7, knight c2, or queen c2 possibility. That's why Grandmaster Minassian played 91 to control both of these c3 and c2. And in a way, after bishop a6 with tempo, to play rook f2. But now, Grunfeld played knight b6. Grunfeld, Israeli Grandmaster, uh, went for a very schoolish type of approach and the plan for black. I like it very much. Look at this. Knight on b4 supports d5, wants to penetrate on d3 or c2. Knight on b6 wants to go on c4. I very much enjoy black's game here. After knight a3 to stop for e5, now he even wants to give an active role to the bishop on g7. So after he captured, went here, played queen d8, brought this rook to c8, and after knight d7, overprotected knight on b4, played bishop f8 afterwards. Probably wants to go with the knight on c5 with a full domination, control of the dark squares, and a pretty strong game for black. Eventually, Grandmaster Grunfeld won this game. I like it a lot. I don't want to show you like the whole game because they both, towards the end of the game, made some mistakes. But the thing was that up to this moment, it was absolutely almost perfect example how is black supposed to treat the close Sicilians. And by the way, keep in mind, it happens when they go with c3 without knight on c3. It's very important to notice this difference and to know that sometimes they just want to go with some d4 once they defend the pawn. A famous game between Fedorov and Kasparov. Instead of c3, they can also play third possibility, and they can go with h3. By the way, we're still discussing when they play second move d3 or when they play second move g3. So when they go with this early h3 possibility, they still want to go with straightaway g4. They still want to go with queen e1, queen h4, a type of attack very typical for Grand Prix attack. And finally, they want to avoid bishop g4, bishop f3 idea, but they also want to avoid like knight g4 once they place the bishop in. If in previous positions we needed rook on b8 to secure b5 and b4, you don't need it here. There is no knight on c3. Even if when the pawn was on c3, then the rook on b8 goes along well with the pawn on b5, and after b4, the b file would be. Here you just play b5 as a simple space grabbing move to go on the queen side. So after like g4, you just go a5. And when Fedorov played f5, Kasparov played b4. What I like about this game, that Kasparov absolutely treated this game in its classic queenside fashion. And from another point of view, Fedorov probably treated this position with the white pieces how most of your opponents, even on low and medium levels, are going to do. So they just learned a plan that they should go with the queen e1, queen h4, bishop h6, and knight g5, similar to the GPA, and that's what they do. So after like bishop a6, you'd like to break with c4. After queen h4, that's what Gary did. He played c4. Very much like this fast reaction by Kasparov on the queen side. And Fedorov just played bishop h6. He doesn't pay too much attention. He still wants to go with a typical knight g5. And I can see some mate. But now you just have to see what is important about this game. C takes, Kasparov captured. And this guy played rook e1. Kasparov captured on h6 and came up with queen b6. It's nice. White, obviously, almost only need one more move, knight on g5. And there is knight on f6, so he has to find a way to get rid of this knight. But it's not so easy. So after like king h1, Kasparov jumped with the knight on e5. A very nice, and it will turn out to be a crucial move of the game. This knight on e5, first of all, for the time being closes and prevents further activity of the bishop on g2. But more importantly, he defends square f7. Why is that so important? I'll show you now. When this guy played knight bd2, Kasparov played rook a8, placing the rook on the only open file, knight g5, and he now played rook c2. Played rook f1 to go with f takes g6 and rook f6. But it will turn out not to be of a crucial importance. Kasparov captured and played rook fc8. His cold-blooded reaction in this game was mainly thanks to the knight on e5. So look at this. After f takes, h takes, knight was hanging. Rook f6 doesn't work. Queen h7 because boom. Knight on e5 defends f7. So the guy played knight b3, Kasparov took on g2, played rook c2, and he was the first one who penetrated and won this game. What a beautiful game played in Waikanze back to 2001. And this was one of a model and school examples. How should you treat these positions when they play h3 without knight on c3 and without pawn on c3? So they just played fast h3, g4, and went for the kingside attack. Ever since I checked this game, I absolutely know how to treat these positions, and I never had again problems against white. So we've seen so far how should we treat if they play d3 or g3 first two moves. So you just go with knight c6, g6, you go with d6, knight f6 castles, and here I'll just once again give a brief explanation. Those who do knight c3, that's a typical close Sicilian. You play also very typical queenside action and go with a rook b8, b5, and b4. Those who go with c3, you still go with the rook b8, b5, and b4, which makes perfect sense since you want to open up this bishop on g7, all together with a rook on b8, and all together with an open b file. And finally, those who play h3, they're willing to go with g4, queen e1, and queen h4, where you absolutely don't need time to waste with a rook b8, but instantly go with b5, a5, b4, and all you have to do in these positions is fast bishop a6 and c4, breaking into the white center. I just showed you like those two basic examples, and now let's go to basics of the classic closed Sicilian. So knight c3, knight c6, g3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7. What I like about closed Sicilians with the black pieces is that you can play them very easily. since you most of the time play just symmetrical. So they go d3, you go d6. And the symmetry actually breaks here. They can play knight g2, they can play bishop e3, and they can play f4. So let's first go with knight g2 move. From all the previously mentioned three moves, bishop e3, f4, and knight g2, this one is the least common. Although it doesn't mean it doesn't happen at all. It does happen very often in the practice, and I have two approaches for you. One very classic approach is just go with e6, and you know it's a typical plan. You just go knight g and e7, and once they threaten to go with d4, you just go with the knight d4. You do not allow them, and once they go with queen d2, hoping at some point to be able to go with the bishop h6, you just go castles. They still cannot do it because you would take and take on c2. And once they play f4, you just go with a rook b8, play like this. Why did I say once they play f4? Because they're not longer threatening. They're not threatening anymore to play bishop h6 at any point. So you just play rook b8, and you just want to go with a typical queenside action, b5 and b4. Many guys with the white pieces make mistake and play first knight e1. It doesn't change and it doesn't stop anything. You always can go with b5, and if they go with an immediate c3, you just take on e2 and still go with b4. When you capture, when you create a possible weakness, when you play queen a5, when you play bishop a6, open b5, your game is gonna look great. That's a typical mistake. Why did I say they make this kind of mistake? Because I believe it's better to bring the knight back to c1. So when we play b5, they just move back this knight to d1. And knight on d1 defends here. And they just want to go with c3, kicking this knight away while we don't have knight e2 to take on e2 with them. So you go b4, they take, and bring the knight back to c6. That's how we have to play. We just go with queen a5. We just go with bishop a6. And this is good position. Black looks great. And this is your goal. You have a nice active game on the queen side. Maybe you want to penetrate queen a3 to threaten both of these, pawn on c3, pawn on a2, to maybe, if this knight moves, somehow jump with a rook on b2. Bishop goes on a6 to have a great activity on this diagonal. Bishop on g7 already does a great job. And if they ever play some bishop f2, you can always consider jumping with the knight on d4, since the queen on d2 would be. One more golden rule is anytime they go with g4, you should never let them go with f5. You should be the one who's going to fix the dark square bishop with f5. And one of the rules that I like once we play this f5 in these positions is if they take by g, take by e pawn. If they take by e, you should be taking by g pawn. That's how my way of treating these systems looks like. And I usually teach my students, it's not like 100% rule, and but generally it should be working like this. And the second plan that I can give you, especially against the knight g2, is Botvinnik's plan to go with e5. Simply, when you go with e5, you kind of want to limit the activity of the knight on e2, and that's why I played the c5. When they play castles, you play knight g7, bishop e3 castles, queen d2, and once again your knight jumps on d4. And when they play f4, you play bishop e6. It's way better to go with the Botvinnik systems with the knight on e2 than with the knight on f3. Knight on f3 could go on h4 and support f5. With the knight on e2, that's not a case. Should not take, cannot go on f4, and they just have problems. Another common option in practice is, of course, f4. f4 we've analyzed previously, and I already showed you. You can play knight f6, knight f3, castles, rook b8, and you just go with b5. And no matter what I do, like g4 or a3, a5, g4, you always go like this. And your main plan is nothing else but to play the English opening reverse, being down tempo. So you move your knight to d7 to open this bishop and threaten pawn. And when you force them to move their rook to b1, your rook goes on a8. It wants to go on a2. Your bishop goes on b7, and you want to triple up your pieces and eventually exchange these heavy pieces, which would give black a relatively easy endgame afterward. I like the game of Peter Heine Nilsson Carlsen's second, who here had black pieces and who's great for showing you like clear and a very simple theoretical paths and how should you treat these positions. So after b3, bishop b7, played flexible e6, played flexible knight e7, and broke with d5. International master Bejtovic was white. After f5, captured an e4, took on f5, and just like you see, he was the one who was in full control of the game. I like the game. I like the fact that he afterwards jumped on e3, that he penetrated with rook on e2, and f6 you can face with the bishop f8. On the other hand, they don't have attack, so black easily won afterwards. And another plan, apart from knight f6, and quite a typical plan, could be e6. If you go with a6, when they play knight f3, knight g, and e7, they go bishop e3 or short castle. When they play bishop e3, one might think that they threaten d4. That's why you have always two options. To jump with the knight on d4, and after castles, followed by rook b8, b5, and b4. That's a traditional and the classic approach of the close Sicilians. But there's another plan. Take a look at this one, and that's my specialty here. You play castles. They gotta go castles. I say they gotta go with that because d4 is not gonna help them so much because in position like this, we absolutely easily can go with the idea of c takes d4, but we also can play hyper flexible and nice d6. That's why most of these guys go castles. You once again can jump by knight on d4 and play rook b8 and b5. But what else can you do in this position? You can do something that not many guys know, and get ready for a specialty of mine. It's b6. b6 is not with the idea, okay, it is to develop the light square bishop to b7 or a6, but mainly to overprotect pawn on c5 so they can break with d5. When they go with queen d2, you just play d5 and threaten d4. If they take, you take. Anytime they take, they just open f5 to harass the dark square bishop. d4, you play knight f5. And now they can't capture on c5 because you would have fork and you would be easily winning. So the thing is, they gotta go bishop f2. You take on d4, take everything. And the point is, when they take on d5, you just play bishop e6. You're not afraid of anything in this game. Any c4, you're just going to undermine with b5, and the knight is going to be seriously undermined. Well, at the same time, taking by bishop on d5, I don't know, you can even play bishop h3, bishop e6. You don't even have to carry about this. You just have a very, very simple type of. By the way, on bishop d5, wait a sec, can we take on d5, play knight f3, and win the... Yeah, we can also do this and win the piece. So all things considered, this, after b6, queen d2, even though it looks probably the most logical and tempting by white, it almost loses for them because of d5. And when you play d5, you threaten d4. Second thing is, what happens if they just bring the bishop back and they want to go at some point with some ideas? You just play e5. They don't have f5. And when they play knight h4 to do it, you just take and go with b5. The point of b5 is that if they take, you always play rook b8, queen b6 to take on b2 afterwards. And if they play f5, b4, you just set your knight into the center of the board and control of the game is yours. Light square bishop is blocked this knight without much activity and prosperity, and this looks good for black. And finally, what happens if in this position they play the most logical d4, like, what is this guy with the black pieces doing? This seems look to me. No, because of d5. Once again, they can't take on c5 because you have d4 fork. If they take on d5, you have a beautiful knight f5 intermediary move, threatening not only the bishop, but afterwards to win the queen or the rook fork. Bishop f2 takes on d4. I just analyzed something. In one game was d takes, bishop takes, knight e5, rook c8, and you're fine. In another game, I saw g4, knight f3, knight d4. And when this guy took an exchange, it's hard to believe, but with the bishop pair, pawn that is hanging on g4, pawn on c2 that is hanging, black was better, and this was correspondence game where black easily managed to win the game. And just like you see, that's why most of these guys do e5. You just jump knight f5 with tempo, take everything, and go with bishop e6, followed by queen e7 and rook fc. Just like you see, in all these positions, this flexible approach with b6 really should give you a lot. And finally, I just want to show you one last thing. If they play so classic bishop e3, you can also go for the most typical plan. And I just decided to finish this lecture with a game of my student, a Chessable guy, famous grandmaster Eric Hansen from Canada. At that time, I was his active coach, and he just played against some FIDE master. The game took part in Willing 2012, and this guy played bishop e3. Eric played rook to b8, because I remember at that time I told you, if you can remember and cannot come up with anything good, always play rook b8 followed by b5 and b4. Of course, that he could have jumped on d4, and after queen d2, that everything in this position would be based on the fact that they just want us to move the knight from g8, and they would immediately play bishop h6. But that's not a point. We just go queen a5. We just wait for them to play f4 before we go with e6 and knight e7. And once they do f4, your knight goes on e6, knight e7, and black looks good. But Eric went for rook b8, which is way easier as far as I'm concerned. And after queen d2, went for b5. His opponent went knight g2, b4, knight to d1. And jump with this knight into the center of the board, which I like a lot. So after a short castle, he had problems. He couldn't play knight f6. If he plays e6 and knight e7, he can all the time face at some point some bishop h6 or knight takes d4 followed by bishop h6. Because of that, Hansen went for h5. An idea of h5 is to go with h4 to launch the attack, but more importantly, to prevent bishop h6. When white played h3, Hansen played a6, played knight e7. He kicked his knight away, played knight e6, brought the knight back into the game, but now Eric already had everything in his hands. Bishop on g7, queen on a5, potentially weak pawns, queen a3, bishop a6, and this just looks great for him. His opponent went for f4, Eric played bishop a6, and when he played bishop f2, this is what I mentioned during this lecture, he made a following move and got a great initiative and won the game afterward. Played knight to jumps to d4, taking advantage of a good queen against bad queen. I believe that you enjoyed in this small presentation of a different, but at the same time very similar plans to the closed Sicilians, and hopefully you won't hate these openings so much any longer, and that this was like a helpful thing. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.